Hello, it's Anna Hill here with the Farming Today podcast. Green gas producers say conflict in the Middle East should be a wake-up call for the government to put more support into renewable gas production.
We should be looking at ways to green our gas system with homegrown energy supplies, and biomethane really is the perfect way to do that.
We'll have more on that a little later. All week we're taking a step back in time and looking at some of the pivotal moments in farming history. Today, Victorian innovation. As populations grew rapidly, farmers in the 19th century strove to advance the way they grew crops, bred more profitable animals and took advantage of new inventions. Bob Hockenhull reports.
A coming together of horses and machinery would revolutionise farming in the Victorian era. At Acton Scott Heritage Museum in Shropshire, Edward, a magnificent shire horse, supervised by the farm manager Alaric Bowler.
So what Edward's doing now is he's going around basically in a circle. He's attached to the horse gin, which then turns a bigger wheel, powers a belt, then goes to the kibbler, which is for crushing corn and to make corn, like the wheat and everything, more digestible for things like poultry. Prior to horsepower, it would have been children in the morning doing it before they go to school. So this is sort of reducing labour by using horsepower.
So all this machinery was revolutionising the way the Victorians were farming.
It reduced a lot of the labour costs. People were then out of work as time went on with all these things that are being developed. So people were having to then move to more urban areas to try and make a living.
Edward the Shire Horse belongs to Steve Ledsham, who started a project at Acton Scott to grow crops. So Steve, we've walked Edward to the edge of some land and you're farming it in the same way as the Victorians would have done.
They primarily used a Norfolk four-course crop rotation. Your pre-chemicals, your pre-most fertilisers, so you've got to keep the land in good heart, so you've got to make sure it's fertilised and you've got to make sure the weeds are kept clean. So that enabled you to grow 2 exhaustive crops and 2 regenerative crops. So basically you started off with winter wheat. In the spring you'd sow a spring crop, and then in between those 2 corn crops you've got a root crop, and if you put the root crop is a cleaning crop really, because you can clean the land while the roots are growing, you keep the weeds down, and then you also put the muck in the ridges that you sow in the roots. And then the spring sown oat is undersown with a clover and a ryegrass mixture, and the clover puts the nitrogen back in the soil. Kept the land in a better, in my opinion, it kept the land in a far better condition than the land is today.
Livestock also underwent dramatic changes during the 1800s.
What we've got here is our Gloucestershire Old Spot pigs. These are sort of typical of the breed that they would have had in the Victorian era. So the Victorian era, they saw massive advances in livestock breeding to maximise characteristics for productivity. I mean, added to that as well would have been better nutrition, which then further led to agricultural shows, so you could showcase these animals and hike your prices up for purebred ones that have won prizes.
When Queen Victoria came to the throne, the Corn Laws were in place. They kept grain prices high and prevented cheap imports. But the laws were repealed in 1846, paving the way for more competition from abroad. Farm manager Alaric Bowler again.
Technological advances in the way of steam power to boats and trains, as well as advances in agricultural machinery, saw a drop in British corn prices due to vast quantities being able to be harvested and shipped from places like North America at low prices. Constant reductions in the need for workforces on top of cheap importation led to less and less labour needed in rural locations.
How would you summarise what effect the Victorians had on British agriculture?
A great deal of experimentation really, and advances in what you could do technologically, and still even nowadays there are elements of what they created which are still carried over in terms of some of the technology that's used, and we're looking to go back to some of the ways they ran things, like the four-course rotation, which is a more environmentally friendly way of running an arable crop.
Indeed we are. That report from Bob Hockenhull. As energy prices are so volatile at the moment, any alternatives to fossil fuels have become an important consideration. Leaders from the UK gas sector have written to the Energy Secretary Ed Miliband this week, urging the government to take decisive action to reduce the country's reliance on foreign gas imports by supporting the production of biomethane. Farming can play a significant part in producing biomethane, as anaerobic digesters use a huge range of ingredients, including animal byproducts, non-food crops and food waste. James Earle is from Future Energy Network and a founding member of the Green Gas Task Force. The task force describes itself as a collaboration of some of the UK's largest biomethane generators, as well as gas networks and energy industry groups. James told me first how biogas and biomethane are used.
At the moment, we have around 130 biomethane sites across the country which are injecting this gas directly into the gas grids. And they are producing, or they have the capacity to produce, enough gas to heat around 1 million homes. Aside from that biomethane, we also have biogas sites which really just use that gas rather than injecting it into the grid. They use it on site in farms and locations across the country to produce low carbon electricity and use it on site.
What does the Green Task Force want from the government?
What we want more than anything is for government to recognise biomethane as an absolutely key lever that it can pull to mitigate that immediate challenge caused by events in the Middle East and help move us towards that low carbon, secure, reliable energy system using as much homegrown energy as we can. Beyond that, we want to see real government ambition put behind this. So setting a really ambitious target, seeing it as a core part of our current and future energy system.
The government says it is supporting new biomethane production through the Green Gas Support Scheme.
Yeah, so that scheme was set to end in 2028, and we've recently had the very good news from government that they plan to extend that out to 2030, which is a really good show of support. But over the last 15 years, there have been a number of different schemes that have stopped and started from government, which has meant that as soon as the sector has got moving in the right direction, it's been sort of 2 steps forward and 1 step back. So what we want to see next from the government is a real long-term signal that they see biomethane as a core part of the future energy system. In the current climate, we should be looking to homegrown sources of energy. We're hearing a lot out of government about the need to push electrification, and that's absolutely true. But we should be looking at ways to green our gas system as well with homegrown energy supplies, and biomethane really is the perfect way to do that. It's also a real economic opportunity. So growing the sector by that much would lead to 60,000 extra jobs in the industry across the country by 2030. So it is a really massive opportunity. The sector is ready to go. It just needs the right signals from government in order to do that.
You said there are about 130 plants at the moment, but where would they go? How big would they be? Is it very difficult to up the amount of plants without coming across, a lot of NIMBYism?
So the benefit from biomethane is there are a really wide variety of different feedstocks that are used in the process, which means that the sites could be, and already are indeed, based all across the country and spread all across the country. So that benefit is seen all over. Yes, there have been particular instances of like you described, of local concerns, but actually when you think about it, relative to other energy infrastructure, a biomethane site is really quite appealing. So the visual impact of the site and the actual land that it uses for the amount of energy that it produces, it has a really quite small physical footprint. The energy infrastructure that you're using to transport that energy around as well is underground in the form of the gas grid. And the plants can be planned and constructed really quickly as well. So when you compare that against alternatives, whether it be solar farms being built on agricultural land with new pylons and electricity wires to transmit that energy, biomethane is actually a really, really appealing alternative to that.
James Earle from the Green Gas Task Force. Agriculture is devolved, and since Brexit, each of the UK's 4 governments has set up its own system for financially supporting farmers. Scotland is the last one to publish its scheme. Farmers and crofters have been digesting the details of the 5-year plan. Payments will be allocated up to 2031, with the biggest changes coming in the last year. It's been broadly welcomed by NFU Scotland, but others have described it as stuck in the past. BBC Scotland's Rural Affairs correspondent Kevin Keane gave me the details.
Scotland still has a lot of farm support schemes that are a legacy of the EU's common agricultural policy, and in the main, most of those are being kept for now at least, because, of course, the SNP's policy is to broadly remain aligned with the European Union. So what it does is it maps those existing schemes to the 4-tier system that it's already confirmed that it's introducing. The first 2 of those tiers are direct payments. Tiers 3 and 4 are indirect payments. So Tier 1, that'll contain things like basic payments, less favoured area support for suckler beef producers and upland sheep farmers, as well as the fruit and vegetable aid scheme. The total pot for that will be just shy of 400 million in that first year. Tier 2, that'll be for enhanced greening, about 142 million pounds in there. So that's things like field margins, fallow land, hedges and so on. And then the other 2 schemes, Tier 3, so that's things like agro-environment, climate scheme, that tier's worth just over 100 million, and Tier 4 worth 30 million. That's things like agritourism, land matching, knowledge transfer and so on.
Farmers are a bit annoyed because they wanted a multi-year settlement, but it's actually going to be annually decided.
It is indeed, but actually what's contained in this document are indicative figures for beyond that first year. In fact, the figures remain identical across the first 4 years of that, which NFU Scotland says would amount to a real terms cut in funding. But as I say, they're just indicative, and the Scottish Government says that that's because the settlement that they receive from Westminster, the block grant, is only done annually, so they can't commit to multi-year spending.
And what happens then after those first 4 years then?
There's a fairly clear indication in this document now that after that first 4 years that reform is coming. So in 2030-31, the budget for direct payment falls, while the budget for indirect payment, a lot of those environmental schemes and so on, that increases and the total pot stays the same. The Scottish Government says that it's to more explicitly require the adoption of sustainable and regenerative farming practices through what it says would be revised eligibility and activity requirements. But many environmental groups are saying that by then it would have taken about 10 years to reach that kind of point of serious reform for the benefit of nature and for the climate. Wasted years, say the likes of RSPB Scotland, but ministers and farming leaders, they're saying that they've been, during that time, providing much needed stability for these rural businesses during unstable times.
And when Scottish farmers look across the border and see the other arrangements that England, Wales and Northern Ireland have, how do they feel about comparison with the rest of the UK, do you think?
Well, I think it's fair to say that Scottish farmers are pleased that they have been able to retain certainly the basic payments that are transitioning towards being phased out in other parts of the UK. The Scottish Government really has been the outlier in all of that. Ministers argued that that was necessary to maintain continuity, but also to kind of recognise, if you like, the difference in the farming types here. So about 85% of agricultural land in Scotland is classed as less favoured compared with less than 20% in England. As I say, farmers, they've been very grateful for that stance that's been taken by government, but environmental groups have said that it's been a missed opportunity for reform for both farmers to modernise their businesses, but also for the landscape, the planet and for nature.
BBC Scotland Rural Affairs correspondent Kevin Keane. That's all from us. I'm Anna Hill. The producer was Rebecca Rooney. Farming Today is a BBC Audio Bristol production.